Musical musings, musical musings, musical musings, musical musings.
Hello and good afternoon. Welcome back to our latest episode of the Musical Musings program. We air this program every Wednesday at 1 p.m., and we broadcast it from Rajamachan University of Technology, Peranakan. I will be bringing this program to you in two parts. In our first part of our program, I will introduce a performer, artist, band, group, whoever's performing the song that we're going to do today. So I will introduce that performer, and I will introduce a song by them. And we will discuss that. We will discuss the main idea about the song, its main themes, what it's all about. Then we will go ahead and listen to the song. And when we come back for the second part of our program, we will go over the lyrics. That means the words to the song. And we will take a look at anything that's especially difficult to understand, difficult vocabulary, slang, idioms, anything like that might be hard. Then we'll get to the latest news and updates from the university as usual.
Musical musings, musical musings, musical musings, musical musings.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Gary Gray, and I am your host for the Musical Musings program. I'm an American English teacher here at Rajamachan University of Technology, Peranakan. I have been teaching here for about 7 years, and of course I'm an English teacher, and sometimes during my classes I do like to incorporate music into my teaching. And so naturally I am here hosting a musical program for you. So on every episode we have a song by a different performer, and I try to pick different performers every single week. We have, I think, repeated a performer only one time before. Now we have been doing this for well over a year now, every week, and so at this point I have not taken a record and kept track of all of our episodes, who we've done. So I'm starting to wonder about whether or not we're repeating some artists. I do not think we have done this artist yet. The artist for today is Elvis Presley. It's actually a little bit surprising that we haven't done him. Elvis Presley is one of the most famous musicians, singers ever in history, ever. He was performing mostly in the 1950s, 1960s. He did perform in the 70s as well, but a lot of people thought his performances weren't as good then. He didn't take good care of his health, so he was really overweight. And because everyone looked at him as sort of this sex symbol back in the 1950s and 60s, they thought he was very sexy. You know, when you're getting really big and fat like that. Some people like that, I guess, but most people don't find that to be very attractive, and so he didn't look good. And being overweight like that, it can cause you to sweat a lot, so he would be sweating so much when he was up there on stage. So he wasn't really... He lost some of his popularity in the 70s. He was still very popular. Don't get me wrong. He was still very popular. But he became less popular throughout the 1970s. But in the 1950s and 1960s, he was maybe the most famous American artist. If you were looking at performers in general, instead of just a solo artist, he might not have been the most popular because the Beatles came along around that time as well. Their popularity was a little bit later, but only slightly. They were like just a few years later as far as their peak popularity. So I would say the Beatles were probably more famous. They were certainly more globally famous. But when you're talking about Elvis, you notice I just call him Elvis. That's how he was known. His name is Elvis Presley, but everyone just calls him by his first name, Elvis. When you're talking about Elvis, he is right up there. He is one of the most famous singers ever. Okay, so a little bit about Elvis. He was born in 1935, and he was born in Mississippi. Most people associate him or think about him as far as a place. They think about Memphis, Tennessee. That's where they think of him being from. And that's because he did live most of his life there. He actually moved to Memphis when he was just a kid. So he was still with his parents because he was a kid. So his parents moved to Memphis, Tennessee from Mississippi. In case you're not familiar with where these places are in America, Tennessee is kind of like the southeast part of the country. I say kind of. It's not way, 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 way far south. Mississippi is. That's where he moved from. And Tennessee is just north of Mississippi. And it's also not way to the east. Tennessee isn't like on the east coast. But again, it's close. It's only one state to the west of that. It's you have North Carolina to its east, and North Carolina is on the east coast. So Tennessee is west of that. Okay, but it is generally considered part of the Southeast. So he's from the southeast part of America. That's where this is. That's where Memphis, Tennessee is. Again, not way far southeast. Even if you don't know America very well, you're probably familiar with Florida. And so if you saw a map of the U.S., maybe you know where Florida is. It's the part that sticks out. That's in the furthest southeast part. So that would be as far southeast as you could get. Okay, so Tennessee is up to the north and west of there. So it's not all the way in the southeast. But it's generally considered part of the southeast portion of America. And that's kind of important because they have a certain type of music there, and he got a lot of his musical influence from that. Okay, so when you say someone is from somewhere, that usually means like where they were born. So he's from Mississippi, but people think of him as being from Memphis, so from Tennessee. So he lived in Memphis, Tennessee most of his life, and in fact, when he died, he is, I think I mentioned that he is already dead. He was not that old when he died. I told you he was really overweight in the 1970s. He was also addicted to medications that he shouldn't have been taking. So unfortunately, sadly, he died at a fairly young age, at the age of 42 in 1977. In fact, that is one of the very first memories in my life. I was a young kid at that time, and nobody really told me. I didn't hear it from anyone because I was just a little kid. I wasn't really into music at that time. Whatever. I didn't even. I'm sure I knew who Elvis was because I did have some family members who were big fans of his. And to this day, I remember seeing this news story. But back in those times, it used to be very popular in America to recycle newspapers. And a community thing that my family was involved in, we took part in that. So we would collect newspapers and save newspapers. So we had a whole pile of newspapers in our basement. And I remember bringing down this pile of newspapers, and in the very top newspaper on top, it talked about Elvis passing away. And that was in 1977. So that's one of the first things I remember in my life is the death of Elvis Presley. Okay. So again, he was born in 1935, died in 1977. He started performing in 1954. So he would have been about 19 at that time. His birthday, I believe, is very early in the year, so I'm sure he would have had his birthday by then, so it would have been 19. So instead of 18, if he started before his birthday, he would have been 19. So he started performing at 19 years old. Now, the genre, the style of music he sings is really varied. It's really... He does some rock songs. Like the song we're going to do today is one of his more pure rock songs. We're doing Heartbreak Hotel by Elvis Presley, and I would say that Heartbreak Hotel is just a rock song. But he also does country music. He does some R&B, kind of soul type music. If you tuned in last week, you know what R&B music is. It stands for rhythm and blues. And rhythm and blues music is a little weird because it's really from Detroit, which is up north. But it gets a lot of influence from Southern music, from jazz music, which comes out of the South. And so this is what I mean when I kept talking about Tennessee and where Elvis is from. He gets that R&B, that kind of jazz style, and he gets that country background from the South. He would even sing some gospel songs. That's like religious music, and that comes out of the South as well a lot. I mean, there's plenty of people in the North that like gospel and sing gospel music, but as far as where it's really rooted, it's thought of as being from the South. And so even his rock music has a little bit of a Southern sound to it. It's not as Southern rock as maybe a group like the Charlie Daniels Band, who we've done on this program before. But you can feel a little bit of it in there. So he has a lot of Southern influence in his music. But as far as what genre he sings, what genre he performs, it's really all over the map. From gospel to country to rock. He does a lot of love songs as well, so those will usually be a little slower and softer. So you might call those soft rock or just ballads. So he really has a wide range of music that he performs. And in fact, given how brief his career was, because he died at 77, so he actually had to leave to go into the military for a couple of years as well, so he really only performed for about 20 years, which I know may sound kind of like a long time, but compared to some of the other artists we've done on this program, we've done artists who started performing in the 1950s and are still around today. So we've done artists who have been performing for 50 years or more. 20 years is fairly short. He has a tremendous number of songs. Now, most of the songs he didn't actually write himself. He would perform songs that other people wrote, generally. But they are still considered his songs, because a lot of musicians do that. Especially, it's probably even more common now. If you take like a really famous singer now, like Beyonce or Lady Gaga, she probably doesn't write any of her songs. They probably don't write any of their songs. I'm sure they contribute to how they sound and things like that, and they'll add their opinions, but as far as actually writing them, they probably don't do any of that. Okay, so again, as I mentioned, Heartbreak Hotel, let's talk about that briefly before we listen to it. And Heartbreak Hotel, that came out in 1956, so that was pretty early in his career. And in fact, it wasn't his first single. When we say a single, this was back in the days when people had records. And so a single is like one song that's on a record. And sometimes they would release a song by itself. Well, there's two sides of a record, so you have the A side, the B side, so there's going to be two songs on there. Rather than what's called an LP, which is long play. That's the full record with the whole album on there. So sometimes they would just release songs as a single by itself. And that's what they did with Heartbreak Hotel. And it was his first single, not ever. I'm actually not sure, even though I have to research sometimes for this program. I'm not really sure where I was researching, didn't mention it. not really sure if he had a single at all in 1954 or 55 under his original record label. When I say record label, I mean the company that was doing the recording for him. But he switched to a company called RCA, who was hugely popular at the time. I mean, I don't think you really hear about RCA anymore, but they were very big back then. I'm not even sure if they exist anymore, to be honest with you. Huge record company, huge record label. He switched to them in 1956, and Heartbreak Hotel was his first single. And I've talked about this many times in recent weeks because I didn't even realize this until I started doing this program. And then I noticed, jeez, these bands, like their best song comes like on their very first album, like 80% of the time. You think about it, I guess it makes sense. It's not really what I would have expected. You would think you get more experience, you get better. So maybe kind of in the middle of a performer or band's career, that's when their best songs would come out. But, you know, when you sign an agreement with these record labels, like RCA, for example, they require you to put out a certain number of songs and a certain number of albums. So you might start losing some of the creativity over time because you got to get the song out, got to get another song out, got to get another song out, got to get another song out. And it becomes less creative, becomes less enjoyable for the artist. And so when you think about it that way, it does kind of make some sense that maybe the best work comes early in these performers' careers. Now, I have to say with Heartbreak Hotel from Elvis Presley, you could really argue whether or not this is his best song ever. I mean, he's got so many really good songs. Usually at the end of the program, I mention some other good songs by the artist or the band. I will do that again today. And it's going to be a longer list than I usually give because he's got so many. But Heartbreak Hotel, if it's not his best, it's certainly up there because, in fact, it did become the number one song in America. Now, I believe that probably some of his other songs did as well, which is why you can't say absolutely that this was his best song. But if it wasn't, it's one of his best songs. And it was, and again, once again, we see here, it's his very first single. At least his very first one under the RCA label. I don't know if he had any singles under his previous label, but he was only with that previous label for a year or two. So this is still very early in his career. This is in 1956. Remember, I told you he started performing in 1954. So you're only talking a year to 2 years. And again, like I said, this one came in number one in the USA. This is more of a rock and roll song, as you'll hear when you listen to it. This is more of a rock and roll song than some of his other music. I'm not saying he doesn't have any rock and roll songs. There's a few I'll mention at the end of the program that definitely, just like this one, just straight up rock and roll. But he does, like I said before, he does sing a lot of different genres. So there's a lot of music he does that's not rock and roll. Might be R&B, which kind of combines some rock and roll elements in there. But it might be R&B, might be gospel, might be a ballad, like soft rock, something like that. So he's got a lot of other songs. So most of his songs are not straight up rock and roll. This one is. This one is a rock and roll song, Heartbreak Hotel. Now, what it is, what it's about, I mentioned in the introduction to our program, I'll tell you about the main theme of the song. Well, it's kind of obvious. It's kind of obvious. There's not much to say about the theme of this song, right? It is about being heartbroken. The only thing that's a little weird is how the title works. Like, it's talking about a hotel. What does that mean? Okay, so we'll get to start explaining like what the words mean, how they're being used. That's kind of getting into the slang or idioms or things like that. So we'll discuss that in the second part of our program. So why don't we right now, let's just get to the song. As always, any of you joining us on YouTube here, you know the copyright issues prevent us from embedding the video. So please click on the link in the upper right. That will take you to the video of Heartbreak Hotel. And once that's over, you can come back here. You can just come back to this video for the second part of our program. Anyone listening radio or streaming, you will be able to listen just fine. There is a bit of an intro before the song. It's a live performance, so Elvis is interacting with the crowd. So if you're listening on radio or streaming, it might seem a little bit weird at first, but don't worry. It's only about 4-minute long video. So obviously that introduction doesn't go on too long before we get to the song. So just be patient and the song will come on. All right, let's get to the song.
Musical musings, musical musings, musical musings, musical musings.
Welcome back. All right, that was Heartbreak Hotel by Elvis Presley. And that is a song about being broken-hearted. Okay, so let's start right away at what Heartbreak Hotel. What does he even mean by that? Why are we calling it a hotel? Why are we calling it a hotel? What does that mean? Okay, so first of all, it's just being kind of playful because if you notice in the song, it talks about lonely streets. So we're talking about streets, hotel, things like that. So it's just kind of being playful, playing with the words. But as far as any sort of deeper meaning to that, what he's talking about there, what he means by saying Heartbreak Hotel is that's where he's living. Okay, but what does that mean, Heartbreak Hotel? What do you mean you're living there? In other words, that's his life. So his heartbreak is consuming him. That's all he thinks about. He's very sad. He's very heartbroken. So his girlfriend must have broken up with him or whatever. And so he is just extremely sad. That's what he means when he's talking about living at Heartbreak Hotel. In other words, he's living the heartbreak. That's what his life is. That's all he's concerned about in his life. It's just overwhelming his entire life. All right, so let's get down to the lyrics. It says, well, since my baby left me. Okay. Right away, baby. This is so common that you're probably familiar with it. You might have heard like the slang term bae, which is short for that, or babe. It's a term used for love for your girlfriend or boyfriend. So it doesn't mean an actual baby. No, like a little tiny child. No, he's talking about his girlfriend. Well, since my baby left me, I found a new place to dwell. Ooh. Okay, here's some difficult vocabulary. And it's interesting because it's a short word. Usually short words are not difficult vocabulary. This one is. The word dwell. It's actually easy vocabulary as far as what it means. It's difficult because we don't use the word a lot. So you've probably never heard the word dwell. To dwell somewhere, it means you live there. Now, we do use that word a little bit differently sometimes. We say you can dwell on something. That means you're thinking about something a lot. Like someone might say, oh, don't dwell on it. In other words, something bad has happened. It probably wasn't a really big deal, but for some reason it does bother you a lot. So you're thinking about it a lot. And so someone else, because it wasn't that big of a deal, someone else might tell you, just don't dwell on it. In other words, stop thinking about it. Stop letting it bother you. Just move on. Forget about it. It's okay. Not that big of a deal. Move on. So dwell can also mean that you're thinking about something too much. You dwell on it. And if you think about that, it kind of means the same thing. To dwell somewhere means you're staying there. To dwell on something means your mind is staying on that thing. So it means to stay someplace. But when you talk about a place to dwell, like this, I found a new place to dwell, it means he's living there. So since my baby left me, I found a new place to dwell. It's down at the end of Lonely Street at Heartbreak Hotel. Okay, so again, the Lonely Street, it's just playing with words. He just means he's lonely, right? Okay, just playing with words. Lonely Street, the Heartbreak Hotel. Heartbreak Hotel's at the end of Lonely Street. And I do think they're being a little bit clever here with their wording. Kind of giving the lyrics a little extra meaning there. When they say down at the end of Lonely Street, the end of a street. I think the end has a meaning there, because in America we have a word for the end of a street. If a street actually ends, a lot of streets don't end. Well, I mean, they end somewhere, right? They can't run across the ocean, but I mean, a lot of streets have roads to turn off of them, and so they don't just end. When a road just ends, and this does say the end of Lonely Street, we call it a dead end. We also have a phrase where we talk about the end of the road, which means that something is over. For example, in America, on the day this is being broadcast, this episode is being broadcast, we will be having a presidential election. Actually, because of the time difference, the presidential election is the previous day, but the results will be coming in around the time that this program airs. So there's a presidential election. And for one of the candidates, if he does not win, it is really going to be the end of the road for him. He's too old. He's not going to run again. So also he has legal troubles, which could cause him problems, but he can kind of get around them if he becomes president. So, he can kind of get away with that. But if he's not president, he's going to have trouble. So he's at the end. He's going to hit the end of the road. So we're talking about his baby. So in this song, we're talking about his baby leaving him. It's the end of the road. So I think they were really clever here with the lyrics, where it says down at the end of Lonely Street at Heartbreak Hotel. So some really clever lyrics. Very simple, but clever. Okay, so then we continue. It says, at Heartbreak Hotel, where I'll be so lonely, baby, I'll be so lonely. I'll be so lonely, I could die. All right, there's nothing difficult to understand there. He's so lonely he could die. Now, when someone says that, that's kind of like slang as well. It's maybe more of an idiom when you say you could die. People, almost nobody dies when they say that. It just means that they wish they weren't going through those feelings, which is why they say they'd rather be dead, or I could die, or something like that. They would rather not be going through those feelings. Actually, sometimes we even use it with good feelings, like you could laugh. I laughed so hard I almost died. Okay, you didn't almost die. We use that as an exaggeration to say something is a big deal, to say something is important. So the loneliness is a lot for this singer, is a lot for this person. Okay, so then we continue on. Well, although it's always crowded, you still could find some room for broken-hearted lovers to cry there in their gloom. All right, so although it's always crowded, you still could find some room. It's always crowded. In other words, there's always a lot of broken-hearted people out there. It says you all could always find some room. Well, yeah, because there's always more people getting their heart broken. So there's always, it's kind of a sad song, even though it's a kind of upbeat rock song. It's actually kind of sad because what he's saying there is there's always a lot of broken-hearted people, and there's always going to be more broken-hearted people because someone's going to break up with someone and break their heart. So that's what he's saying there. For broken-hearted lovers to cry there in their gloom. Okay, so for broken-hearted lovers, okay, to cry there in their gloom. All right, here's another short but tricky vocabulary word, gloom. What does gloom mean? Gloom basically means sadness. Now, again, this is another word like dwell that we could use in different ways. Like you can say it's gloomy outside with a Y at the end, gloomy, but that just changes it into a adjective. So it's really the same word. Gloomy comes from gloom. But I said it means sad. What do you mean it's sad outside? It's not sad. It can't be sad outside. What that means when you say it's gloomy outside, it's usually cloudy, maybe some drizzle. That's that really, really light rain, so it just feels not nice outside. It's dark, not nice. That's gloomy. Okay. But in this case, gloom means sadness. So to cry there in their gloom means they're crying because they're sad. All right, we continue on, and he repeats that they'll be so lonely line. They'll be so lonely they could die. And then that's really just about the end of the song, because then he repeats the first part, except he says, if your baby leaves you, instead of saying, since my baby left me. It says, now if your baby leaves you, you'll need a place to dwell. Just take a walk down Lonely Street. Okay, so, and then I believe on that last verse, he does not repeat Heartbreak Hotel. I think he says to, but then he doesn't say where. I'm not sure why they leave that off in the last verse there. Not sure. I'm not sure if there's really a reason for that, because it still does say you're going to go down Lonely Street, so presumably you're going to Heartbreak Hotel. So I'm not sure why they do that with that last verse. And I will tell you, and I'm not sure about this recording that we played, there are some versions of this song that have an extra verse or two. I honestly forget whether the version that I pulled for this program has one of those extra verses, but it may. So there may be more words in the song than what you just heard me go over. What we just went over is pretty short. 3 very short verses with a very short chorus, I guess you'd call it a chorus, where he says, be so lonely, you could die. I mean, I guess that's the chorus because it gets repeated after each of those verses, but it's pretty short. It's a pretty short chorus. So you might have noticed that there's more words on the clip that we played of the song. I'm actually not sure. I don't remember which version I pulled for our recording for today. But there are some versions that have an extra verse in there. So you might have heard an additional verse when you listen to the video or watch the video or listened to the music from the video. If you're listening on radio or streaming, you would have just heard the music from the video. All right, so like I said, it's pretty short. That's really it for this song. That's why we talked a lot in the first part of our program with the introduction, because the lyric review here is pretty short. But I do think it's an interesting one because even though as short as it is, we did have a couple of good vocabulary words, dwell and gloom. We also had some interesting idioms, like when people say, oh, I could have died, or I wish I were dead, which kind of has the same meaning. It's kind of an idiom that we use. Also, understanding what he means by Lonely Street and Heartbreak Hotel, like those are places you live. What does that mean when you're talking about actually being heartbroken? So it's an interesting. So we had some interesting little idioms and slang and vocabulary there in that song, even though it was pretty short. Okay, so that's Heartbreak Hotel from Elvis Presley, and as I promised you, I'm going to give you a list of some of the other songs by him. And by the way, these are just his most popular songs and ones that he is mostly known for. He did a lot of cover songs of other people's songs as well. Like he sang My Way. I did it my way. You might have heard that song. That's by Frank Sinatra. Actually, a lot of people have sung it, but it's most well known to be sung by Frank Sinatra. Well, Elvis also sang that song. And his version of it was pretty popular, actually. So it's another popular song of his, but I don't have that on the list here because that's not thought of as his song. That's thought of as Frank Sinatra's song. So these are just songs that are thought of when you think of them. You hear this song, you think of Elvis. Okay, and again, someone else might have sang some of these songs before as well. In fact, I know a couple of these songs I've heard other people sing. But again, you primarily think Elvis when you hear these songs. Okay, so the list of songs I'm going to give you 10 songs. This is on top of Heartbreak Hotel. We have Heartbreak Hotel. Here are 10 more songs. I told you, this guy has a lot of songs. He was really good and really famous. Okay, so In the Ghetto. It's number 1. Number 2, Jailhouse Rock. Number 3, Hound Dog. Number 4, Are You Lonesome Tonight? Number 5, Can't Help Falling in Love with You. Number 6, Burning Love. Number 7, Blue Suede Shoes. Number 3, All Shook Up. Number 4, Don't Be Cruel. And number 5, number 10, excuse me. 5, 10, 10. Number 10, Love Me Tender. Sorry about that. That's number 10, Love Me Tender. Okay, now, all of these are very popular. Doesn't mean they're my favorite songs by him. For example, Burning Love. That's a lot of people love that song. I actually can't stand it. I don't like that song at all, but a lot of people love it. So I'm just giving you the most popular songs that you may want to listen to. It doesn't mean you're going to like all of them. I don't like all of them. I do like most of these, though. I really appreciate his kind of up-tempo, faster, more rock and roll songs, especially because this was at the sort of early part of rock and roll. So he really broke into that and really set the stage for that. So I really appreciate those songs from him. So a song like Are You Lonesome Tonight, which is a really kind of slow ballad, Are You Lonesome Tonight? Not one of my favorites by him. Definitely a good song. I told you I don't really like Burning Love. I do like Are You Lonesome Tonight? It's a good song. It's not one of my favorites. I prefer kind of the more upbeat songs like Heartbreak Hotel, Jailhouse Rock, Hound Dog, All Shook Up. Those are some of my favorite songs by Elvis. Those are the kind of faster, more upbeat songs. Some of his slower songs like Are You Lonesome Tonight or Love Me Tender